Episode 1. The Sin Beneath the Pew. They say the dead cannot hear. They say cemeteries sleep in silence. But at St. Mirabel's Church, the silence had breath. It began with a sin, something wrong, something ancient. Father Aldrich smelled it first during the Tuesday confessional. Not incense, not mold. It was closer too. But it moved, as if it were alive. A woman entered the booth. She didn't kneel. She didn't speak right away. And when she did, her voice didn't match her body. Forgive me, Father. I've come to confess a sin that was never committed. A pause. Aldrich held his breath. This wasn't his first strange confession. The town of Calvert held many souls with twisted shadows. But this was different. I killed a man in my dreams, and he was buried before I woke. Father Aldrich standing his hand on the wound divider. Dreams are not sins. Child, she exhaled, then winded the grave appeared. Her voice broke. She gave him a name, Elias Lord, a drunkard, a gambler, dead 20 years. Then stood under my hand. Father, and I woke with blood in my mouth. Aldrich smiled. She left. Confession. No name, no evidence, only a whisper. They told me not to speak. They never said I could confess. That night, I dreamed of a casket, not buried, but going upward. And in the morning, the church smelled of open graves. Father Aldrich checked the cemetery buildings. Elias Lord's grave had not been disturbed in the surface. But then came the knock. Not on his door, on the confessional. At 3:17 a.m., no one stood outside. Only a piece of cloth, torn, soiled, marked with a date written in blood. April 12th, 1866. A date before the church was even built. He brought it to the altar. The candles died instantly, and something began to whisper from beneath the pews. It said she wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. Saint Mirabel's wasn't built on sacred ground. It was built over a confession that never should have been heard. And now, the dead wanted their absolution. Episode 2. The Grave That Breathed. By dawn, Father Aldrich couldn't ignore it. The soil beneath Elias Thorne's grave was moving, not like an animal burrow. No, it rose and fell, as if the earth itself inhaled. He knelt beside the headstone, murmuring the Latin rites. But with every word, the earth again, the birds had stopped singing. Even the wind refused to pass. He reached for the soil and felt warm. Graves are never warm. Back inside the record, he opened the church's ancient letters. Those were rotted, archived by him. Behind it, he discovered a beautiful pages bound in red leather. No title, no author, but inside a confession. One stood out. April 12th, 1866. She confessed until 9 p.m. Her hands were back. Her eyes burned. She said the sin was because when it burned her eyes open. Another picture. Days later, the dead man walked. We buried him again, this time face down. Father Aldrich slammed the book shut. Dust rose like breath. He rushed to the bell tower. No one in the village must enter the church today. Not until they understood. But he didn't make it there. At the door stood a boy. Pale, eyes wide with gnawing. The woman came back last night. The boy whispered. She told me to say it. Say what? The child's voice changed. Low, hollow. She confessed for him. And now, he wants her voice. Then the boy dropped. Fainted. No goni limp like a marionette. Eyes open, but empty. And once more, the sin returned. But now it was stronger. Now it was breathing. And in the confessional, the candles lit themselves. One by one. Episode 3. The Voice Beneath the Floorboards. Father Aldrich barely slept. The church pulsed like a living lump, inhaling secrets, exhaling rot. When he walked its aisles, the wooden floor no longer creaked. It groaned. At sunrise, the boy was gone. No footprints, no parents looking, no trace he'd ever been. Instead, in the middle of the confessional, lay a rosary, but not one of this era. Its beads were carved bone, its crucifix blackened by flame. He picked it up. A whisper echoed in his skull. She lied. He never forgives. Aldrich turned, expecting someone behind him. Nothing, but from beneath the floorboard scratching, rhythmic, low, like nails striking across wood. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear down. A voice, faint, but there, she bore his guilt. Now he bears her name. That night, Father Aldrich returned to the hidden folio. In the last few pages, written in a desperate, shaking hand, she died during confession, but her soul never left. It was forced to remain until he speaks her sin aloud. If he speaks it, he is freed, but then the burden passes to the priest who hears it. Aldrich slammed the book shut, but it was too late. A knock came to the confessional 3 times, same as before. 3:17 a.m. He opened the door slowly, heart thunderous. No one, only a mouthpiece, a severed mouth nailed to the inner wall, lips sewn shut with twine. Below it, carved in the wood, will you listen? If I scream it, then the candles flared. A scream did come, not from the mouth, from the earth beneath the chapel, and Father Aldrich, for the first time in his life, truly believed. Some sins don't go to hell, they stay behind, waiting for someone to hear them. Episode 4, The Bell That Rang Without Hands. At exactly 3:17 a.m., for the 4th consecutive night, the bell above St. Mirabel's room rings. No wind, no storm, no ropes pulled. Father Aldrich stood barefoot in the nave, the bone rosary clenched in his feast. He had not eaten, he had not prayed, he had only listened, and the church had begun to speak back. Each creak of wood beneath him sounded like footsteps that didn't match his own. Each shadow stretched longer than it should. He had closed the confessional, locked it, yet every night it opened, and something Saturday inside. Not someone, something. The severed mouth was gone. In its place, a handprint burned into the wood. Elongated fingers, no thumb. He brought the ancient folio to the altar. He didn't read it this time. He opened it to the center and laid the rosary across the page. The candles on the altar hissed. The book's pages turned by themselves. Then a voice seen it from the walls, not from the earth, but from the bell itself. He confesses through flesh not his own. Aldrich gritted his teeth. Who is he? What does he want? The bell rang again. Once. The voice. You heard her. Now hear him. Aldrich stumbled back as the pews cracked open. One by one, which split and wept with black sap, a shape rose from beneath the floor near the confessional, cloaked in ash, eyeless, mouth sealed by rosary beads threaded through its lips. It pointed to the altar. The book had changed. A new page bled through the parchment. The sin was not hers. She carried it to spare him, but the vow was broken. The sin awoke, and now he must speak. Through you, Aldrich collapsed to his knees, a rising in his throat. The voice whispered, again closer. Inside him, your mouth will be the final door. Then silence, and all at once every candle in the church went out, not with wind, but with breath, and from the bell tower above, something began to descend, something that no longer remembered being forgiven. Episode 5, The Sin That Walked Without a Name. It stepped out of the bell tower like it had always belonged there, a figure faceless, barefoot, with a chain of rosary beads trailing from its wrist like veins made of bone. It didn't walk, it glided. Father Aldrich backed into the sanctuary, heart pounding, lips moving in half-formed prayers, but none of them came out. His voice was gone. It had been taken. The creature circled him, never touching, yet pressing into his lungs with every movement. It wasn't looking at him, how could it? It had no eyes, but it knew what sin had not yet been spoken. And then it did something that shattered Aldrich's spine with dread. He pointed to the confessional. He resisted, shook his head. No, but the pews began to bend, warping inward, as if the church itself would collapse unless he obeyed. So he entered. There inside the booth was wet, thick with rotten candle wax. The screen flickered, though no flame burned. And then, a breath from the other side. Forgive me, Father. Not a whisper, not a scream, something between, as if the voice was trapped mid-morning. For I have remembered, Aldrich Frowncy. The voice continued, slow and breaking. I lay beside her, while her soul writhed. I said nothing. I buried the knife. I burned the garment. I swore to forget. A shadow passed across the screen, a silhouette that shouldn't exist in this world. The voice cracked, but she carried my guilt. And in return, I carried her scream. Aldrich tried to speak, to absolve, to protest, but no sound came. only a trickle of blood from his ear. The shadow leaned closer. The screen sizzled. I cannot be forgiven unless you speak it. Suddenly, his throat seized, and a voice not his own rose up, screaming the name, Isatora. The air exploded outward. The confessional collapsed, and standing in the center of the rubble was a woman in a funeral gown, soaked in ash. Her eyes opened, and every candle insane. Mirabel's lit in unison, but it wasn't light. It was the beginning of judgment. Episode 6. Isadora's eyes never closed. She stood in silence, in ruin, in like that scorched rug at war. The ash on her gown curled like smoke, still remembering fire. Isadora, her name still ran in the nave, as if the walls of Saint Mirabel's had never heard anything more sacred or more profane. Father Aldrich crawled from the wreckage of the confessional, raw, blood drying at the corners of his mouth. He met her gaze, but her eyes weren't looking at him. They weren't looking at anything in this world. They stared through. Isadora, he croaked, barely his voice. She blinked slow, unnatural, the way someone might when they hadn't blinked for 100 years. And then she spoke. He confessed through you. Father, the sin has passed, but the debt remains. Aldrich's mouth went dry. Whose debt? Yours. The word struck like thunder. The flame in the altar extinguished. The hymn books dropped from their shelves, pages fluttering like dying wings. She pointed to the floor, and it opened, not metaphorically, literally. A crack split down the center aisle of Saint Mirabel's, wide as a grave and deeper than any casket, and from it rose not fire but memory, a child's cry, a woman's last breath, a priest's lie. They were his. You knew, she said. You always knew this church was built on silence. I didn't. I wasn't. You buried her name with the others. You heard their sins and let them fester. He staggered back, choking on air. What do you want from me? Isadora knelt, her veil trailing like morning mist. I want you to listen now, not as a priest, but as the last man alive who remembers. From the crack, a hand rose, small, charred, grasping nothing but the air it was denied in life. Confessions don't absolve when the years are unworthy. And thin Isadora walked backward into the chasm. Her eyes never closed, the ground sealed, but the hand remained, twitching, waiting for Father Aldrich to finally hear what he had silenced. Episode 7, The Pulpit That Bled Memory. For 3 nights, the hand did not rot. It didn't decay or stiffen. It twitched, as if it still had something to say. Father Aldrich avoided the nave. He slept in the choir loft, surrounded by silence, too sharp to be holy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw hers, Isadora's, unblinking, drenched in a sorrow that didn't die. On the 4th night, he awoke to music, the organ, but he had not touched it. No one had, not since the funeral of the boy who had spoken in the demon's voice. The hymn playing wasn't known to him, not Latin, not even human. It groaned, like stone dragged across teeth. He crept toward the altar. The hand was gone. In its place, a book, thin, bound in human skin. He didn't need to open it to know what it was. Isadora's Confessions. He picked it up and the pulpit wept. Crimson tears leaked from its base, soaking into the red carpet below. Words surfaced across the pulpit in blistered wood. Read aloud or join her. His throat tightened. He opened the book. First page, a drawing, primitive, carved in blood and ash. A priest surrounded by faceless women, all nailed to pews. Second page, text. She was 12 when he said silence was sacred. She was 13 when he buried the noise in her mouth. Aldrich dropped the book. No, I never. But the church replied, you listened, and you left. Aldrich ran to the sacristy. The crucifix on the wall turned black in his presence. Holy water hissed away from his fingertips. He fell to his knees, whispering, what do you want from me? And from the altar, a voice rose in it, Isadora's. Eros, tell them what you heard before the walls forget. Then the pews began to fill. Figures, ashen, eyeless, all facing the pulpit, and Father Aldrich knew. The sermon was his, but this time, the words would not be holy. Episode 8, The Sermon That Shattered Heaven. He stepped into the pulpit with shaky knees. The pews were full of the dead. Some wore robes, others rags. Some had no faces at all, but they all stared forward. Waiting, Father Aldrich opened his mouth to begin. Nothing came out. Then the skin-bound book opened itself. Smoke rose from its pages, forming symbols in the air that pulsed like veins. He read, not with his eyes, with something deeper, something older than language. His voice returned but it was not his. You buried her in silence. You dressed her wounds in hymns. You fed her ashes to the chalice. Aldrich gasped, throat burning. The dead did not blink. He continued, for every girl who confessed a wound she could not name. You told her it was grace. You called her screams at trial. You baptized her pain. The pulpit cracked beneath his hints. But pain is not holy, and silence is not salvation. Lightning struck the church spire. The stained glass windows burst inward. Shards rained like judgment. Still, the dead did not move. Aldrich screamed the next line. You heard them, and you let them burn? The floor trembled. The crucifix above the altar wept blood. Anthony Sadora returned. Not walking, floating, her eyes still open, still mourning. She did not speak. She only stared. Aldrich fell to his knees. I am sorry. His voice was his own now. I was afraid. I wanted to believe it wasn't my fault. That hearing wasn't the same as doing. But I knew. The pews creaked. The dead stood, and one by one, they turned and walked toward the altar. Each held a page, torn from the book. Bloody, holy, they laid them before Isadora's feet, then vanished. She looked down, then back at Aldrich, and for the first time, she blinked. The church exhaled, but the doors remained shut. Judgment had only begun. Episode 9. The choir that never sang. The morning never came, though the clock hands moved and the candles melted. No sunlight pierced the stained glass. The church remained suspended in a twilight that didn't belong to heaven or earth. Father Aldrich Saturday on a cold stone floor. The skin-bound book clutched to his chest. Around him, silence pressed like fog. Too thick, too alert, like something was waiting. The pews were empty now, but there still held the scent of ash and burn. He thought it might be over, until he heard the first note, a single, high voice, childlike, hollow, echoing from above the choir. But no one had summoned the loft since the day the orphan boys disappeared during midnight mass 10 years ago. Aldrich climbed the spiral stairwell. Each step groaned underfoot as if remembering weight that had never truly left. At the top, hymn books, yellowed and torn, cobwebs strung like cursed veils. And then I saw them, 12 boys, sitting perfectly still, eyes sewn shut with golden thread, mouths wide open, but not moving. The singing came from their throats, yet their chests didn't rise. One by one, they turned their heads toward him. Their mouths did not close. Aldrich dropped the book, backed into the railing. From behind him, another voice, old, female, familiar. They learned the song you never let them sing. He turned, Isadora, but her veil was lifted now, her face scarred with fire, but regal, radiant. You buried their voices too, didn't you? Aldrich wept. I tried to protect them. You tried to control what could not be silenced. She stepped forward. Every note they sing now is a memory you refuse to carry, and every memory is a key. The song changed, became words. It was there. They heard. It said nothing. The choir rose. Isadora pointed to the nave below. One door remains. Aldrich, and you know where it is? He shook his head. If I open it, then heaven might hear us again. And below them, the altar split one last time. But this time, the light that rose was not fire. It was grace, and it hurt. Episode 10. The door that cried like a child. Aldrich descended the choir loft with lead in his bones. The voices still echoed, not just in the rafters now but in his veins. The altar split had not closed. From the glowing wound in the church's heart, light leaped upward. Not holy, not infernal. Something ancient, a doorway below it, no handle, no hinges, just whittled and wet and breathing. It pulsed like it had lumps. Isadora stood beside it, hands folded like a widow at a funeral. This is where we buried what could not be exorcised, she said softly. Aldrich couldn't move. The air was too heavy. The truth, too close. I don't want to see what's behind it. He whispered. You already have, she replied. Every time you looked away, the choir sang louder, no longer melodic. It was morning, naural, rising. Aldrich took a step forward, then another. The door wept. Yes, actual tears, thick, wet, from invisible eyes. He reached out. His fingers barely grazed the surface before the church screamed. Not the people, not the walls, the spirit of it, and the door cracked from behind him, breathing. And then a voice, high, fragile, familiar. Papa, Aldrich's soul broke. That voice knew it, had buried it, prayed it gone. Isadora turned her face away. You never told them she was yours. He fell to his knees. She died in silence. I thought I was protecting her. No, Isadora said. You were protecting you. The door burst open, and there she was. Small, pale, no older than 9. Veil stitched to her scalp. Feet bare. Her eyes had no color. Her mouth had no smile, but her voice was clear. Will you finally listen to me? Father, he sobbed, nodded, and the dead began to gather behind her. Not in hatred, not in vengeance, in hunger, not for flesh, but for truth. Episode 11. The silence that screamed her name. He had never heard silence like this. Not absence, but pressure. A silence that throbbed, that begged to be broken. She stood before him as daughter, the sin he never named, the child he never claimed. Speak it, she said. Her voice was soft, but it crushed him like stone. Father Aldrich trembled. I tried to save you. No, she answered. You tried to bury me before they asked why I cried. You tried to make my death quieter than my birth. The congregation of the dead circled, each with their own silence, each with their own name, but now they had hers. He looked up at the girlless child. She did not cry. She did not rage. She waited. Her name was Eve. He whispered. The moment her name touched air, the wind howled through the nave, shattering what was left of the stained glass. Colors bled across the floor like spilled light. The pulpit cracked again. The cross above, it groaned. Isadora placed her hand on Aldrich's shoulder. Now speak her truth. And so it did. He confessed to the silence he imposed, to the nights he heard her sobbing, to the moment he found her body, pale and cold beneath the chapel, and said nothing. I was afraid, he said, voice hollow, afraid that if I told them who she was, they'd ask who I was. The ground shook. The church doors screamed on their hinges. From the altar, a flame, rosy gentle, blue, flickering. And then Eve smiled, just once, the first and last smile he'd ever see from her. And with it, the dead began to fade, one by one. They vanished, into the smoke, into the rafters, into memory. But the flame remained. And Eve, now you carry what you gave me, she said, not silence, not shame, but memory. And as she turned, walking back through the door that had wept for her, Father Aldrich understood. Some confessions do not seek forgiveness. They demand remembrance. Episode 12. The Flame That Remembered. The doors of Saint Mirabel swung open at last, but no wind entered, no dawn, just a stillness that felt burned. Father Aldrich stood beneath the altar, the blue flame flickering at his feet. It did not burn. He remembered every word, every scream, every silence. He was alone now. The dead had gone, but their weight remained. He walked down the aisle, each step echoing like the toll of a bell. The church was ruined at shattered glass, warped wood, a pulpit cracked by truth, and yet it had never felt more sacred. In the pews, the hymnals no longer bled, the stone saints no longer wept. The rod had receded, but on the confessional door, a single phrase had appeared, etched in fresh wood. Let no sin be buried in silence again. Aldrich stepped outside. The air was cold. The sky was gray, but it was sky. Real, honest. He heard footsteps. From the path below, a girl approached, alive, barefoot, holding something in her hands. A candle. She offered it to him. Is this still a church? She asked. Aldrich looked back at the wreckage. The altar lit by memory. Yes, he said. Now it is. She stepped inside without fear. He followed. Together, they lit the candle at the flame's edge. And when it caught fire, the bells above framed it in warning. But in welcome, a new confession would begin. And this time, someone would listen. Episode 13. The girl who lit the past. The girl's name was Miriam. No last name, no history, or so she claimed. But as she wandered through the ruined nave, Her fingers found the spaces where old sins had once hidden beneath the pews, behind the pulpit, under the dust of centuries. She walked like someone who had been here before. Father Aldrich watched her with reverence and unease. Something in her gaze did not belong to a child. She paused before the confessional and pressed her palm against the fresh guard phrase, "Let no sin be buried in silence again." Her voice came quiet, deliberate. "Do you know why the dead came back?" Aldrich lowered his head. "Because I let them be forgotten." She shook her head. "No, they came because this place was meant to listen." And it stopped. She stepped into the confessional meant to speak, but to sit in the priest's place. Aldrich frowned. "You want to hear a confession?" he asked. She nodded. He entered the opposite side, closed the screen, and then silence. Not dread, not tension, something sacred. He began, "Bless me, child, for I have buried too much. I heard pain and called it poetry. I saw wounds and labeled them trials. I called silence obedience. I called fear faith." The air grew heavy. The flame on the altar flickered taller, brighter. "I let the church become a graveyard of guilt instead of a sanctuary of truth. I let girls like effing boys and mothers and widows walk away unheard." He paused. Tears carved lines into his skin. "And I thought, if I built enough rituals over their pain, he might stay buried." A moment, then Miriam's voice, steady. "Absolution is not forgetting." He looked through the screen. She wasn't a child anymore. Her eyes held centuries. "You are the last priest of the old church," she said, "and you will be the first listener of the new." Then she vanished, not in smoke, not in light, just gone. The candle she brought remained on the pew, still lit, and outside, for the first time in a long, long while, it began to rain, but not ash, water. Episode 14, The Room That Waited to Be Named. Rain soaked the roof of Saint Mirabel's like a hammer written in water. Father Aldrich stood alone in the nave, watching as drops traced paths through the shattered stained glass. For the first time, the church felt cleansed, not holy but honest. Still, one place remained untouched. The back hallway, past the storage closet, a narrow door with no handle, one that had always stayed shut. No key, no record, just a feeling cold, uninvited. He had walked past it for years, avoided it, prayed around it, but now it pulled at him. The candle Miriam left flickered violently when he stepped near. The flame pointed toward the hallway like a compass drawn to confession. He followed. The door opened on its own. Inside, dust, cobwebs, and a single wooden chair facing a wall of scribbled prayers, not written, scratched, as if hundreds of fingernails had begged for heaven in silence. And in the center, carved deep, she begged here, and no one listened. The room reeked of old fear, of prayers that turned to screams. Aldrich knelt. This was never a closet. He whispered, it was a cell. He lit the candle. The flame pulsed once, then dipped. A shadow formed behind him. Not Isadora, not Eve, someone older. She stepped forward, her face hidden beneath layers of cloth, her hands skeletal but steady. She did not speak. She knelt beside him and pointed to the wall. He read the scratches again. Now they moved. Now they wept. One line rose above the rest. If no one hears, does the soul still rise? Aldrich traced it with trembling fingers. Yes, he said. The candle flared. The shadow woman faded. And suddenly, the prayers stopped moving, as if, after all this time, they had finally been heard. He stood, left the room open, and above the door, a name slowly burned into the wood. The listening room. It had waited a long time, but it would never be silent again. Episode 15, The Confession That Woke the Living. The listening room stayed open. Some said it breathed. Others said it called to them in dreams. But no one in Calvary approached it without leaving changed. Father Aldrich no longer wore his vestments. He no longer preached from the pulpit. Instead, he Saturday just inside the chapel doors with the candle Miriam left burning beside him. And when people came, he did not offer answers. He did not speak first. He listened. Word spread, not of hauntings, not of miracles, but of a place where the truth could finally plead without shame. Mothers came with burdens too heavy for daylight. Sons with memories they thought too twisted for air. Widows, thieves, children, even priests. They confessed, not in secrecy, in witness, and each time a voice shook in fear, the candle burned higher. One evening, near the solstice, Aldrich found the pews full again, but this time of them were dead. The church was warm with breath, not fog. A young boy approached the altar, holding a piece of paper. He unfolded it slowly. "I think this was my sister's," he said. "She wrote it before she was gone." He placed it on the altar. The words glowed faintly, a prayer, not to be said but to be seen. Aldrich read it aloud, and when he did, the windows of Saint Mirabel's did not shatter. They sang. The light that passed through them that evening held no stain of blood or ash, only color, only grace. And above the altar, where the crucifix had once wept, something new appeared, a mosaic, not of Christ, not of saints, of a woman with open eyes and a child at her feet, holding a candle. Isadora, Eve, Miriam, all of them. Father Aldrich wept, not from guilt, from knowing he had finally done the one thing they had waited for. He had listened, and because of that, they could rest. But the living had only just begun.